All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. It is Backdrop Day. We've been working away this morning on a bunch of really exciting new issues for Backdrop, maybe exciting old issues for Drupal. But sprint in full force. For those of you who aren't aware, we are working on Backdrop CMS, and our goals are to create a Drupal 8 comparable content management system with an architecture more similar to Drupal 7. The big picture is that Drupal 8 is going enterprise, and not all of the people who are currently running Drupal 7 are enterprise ready. There are costs associated with that, and maintenance and migration and stuff that people maybe aren't willing to commit to. And so we want to create an easier path forward for the small to medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, and the little guys that may otherwise be left behind by Drupal 8. So in order to do that, we're going to be fixing bugs. These are bugs that exist in Drupal 7, bugs that are already fixed in Drupal 8 and need to be backported, or bugs that we find that haven't been documented in either place. We'll fix all of those along the way, or as many as we can. And in the process of making all these changes, we're going to try and simplify existing systems that are in Drupal 7, but only when those simplifications don't require changing too much of the APIs to do so. So this is going to be a system that's very similar to Drupal 7, but hopefully a little easier to understand. We're also going to be adding some new features to Drupal 7. So there's a lot of new features in Drupal 8. We want to add new features to Backdrop as well, but same rules apply. We're only going to be adding these new features, and we don't have to change APIs very much to do so. And our new features need to be applicable to the 80%. So we aren't going to be adding any new edge case features. We're only going to be adding kind of lowest common denominator features. Our timeline for Backdrop has recently changed. All year we've been talking about shipping this product this summer. Part of the reason that we set that deadline is because we wanted to be sure we were out before Drupal 8. But it looks like Drupal 8 is not as near as we perhaps might have thought it would. They're still kind of struggling to get a bunch of their stuff done. And so I think that we should use the time that we have to spend working on making Backdrop better, finishing the tasks that we have in front of us, and making sure that we have a really good, solid system to compare to Drupal 8 when both of them are out. So we're going to be pushing the release date from Backdrop from summer 2014 to fall 2014. And that'll give us time to finish up the blocks and layouts system, figure out how the new theme system is going to fit with layouts, do some general cleanup on user interface and user experience, and release a really good, solid, polished product, which I think will be great. Let's see. Before we get into our project progress report, I want to kind of do a recap of Drupal Corn, or Drupal Corn Camp, as it's referred to, in Iowa, which is where Nate and I were last week. We had a really great time there. We did a keynote on Friday about Backdrop, which had some comments, both good and bad, about it. Some people felt that it wasn't fair to have a keynote on Backdrop at a Drupal event without a similar venue for the same kind of questions to be answered by the Drupal 8 crew, which I thought was fair. But we did have a lot of good conversations with people in the hallway and at parties and other things that, in other places about Backdrop and Drupal. And I think that for the most part it was fairly well received. There was a huge segment of people there who hadn't heard of Backdrop, so it was a good first introduction to them. And I think it got some good conversations going. We had our first public sprint on Sunday, which we were a little bit worried about, but it ended up working out really well. We had a Backdrop-sponsored Drupal 8 sprint today, as well as Backdrop, which was great. And then at our table, we ended up getting a whole bunch of new contributors, as well as a bunch of people who had already been contributing to Backdrop in little ways, who actually got to kind of get their hands on the code with us there. We got a bunch of new commits even merged in. New pull requests that people had filed have already been merged since then, so I thought that was really great. And generally, the feedback was really good about Backdrop. There were a whole bunch of people saying that was what they wanted, and that was encouraging to hear that. It's been kind of a while since we've had something to show people and to have them get their hands on it and be like, oh, this makes sense. That was good to hear too. So I thought overall it went really well. And yeah, I don't know, Nate, if you wanted to fill in anything else from your experience there as well.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, we've got a bunch of progress updates in the various categories that we're trying to pursue, so we can talk about those as we get to each one of the major initiatives.
Okay. Great. So I guess we'll proceed on to that. Progress report. One of the things that I briefly mentioned that we're really hoping to get into Backdrop is a new blocks and layout system. This is something that updates the old block system, which is a little bit antiquated, and gives us a fancy new interface for setting up layouts. Layouts are going to be completely separate from the theme, so that your theme will really become more of a skin, and it will be able to skin any number of provided layouts, either layouts that come from core or layouts that come from other contrib projects. But I think it'll finally start to, if we can separate those two things, so that people will kind of start being able to see a theme the way it's supposed to be seen without having to worry about flipping a theme and breaking your site, which I think is going to be a huge step forward. So Nate, do you want to give us a little update on how blocks and layouts is going?
Yeah, so there isn't any new progress since I posted the video last week. But if you'd like to check out blocks and layouts and where we currently are with that, you can check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/backdropcms, and you can see a screen or a screencast of where blocks and layouts currently are. We're overall looking really pretty good. We've got the base system in place. We've got conditionals. We've got it all saving to CMI. We've got drag and drop layouts. The biggest part that it's currently missing is that it's not actually integrated fully into the theme system, so it's not replacing regions at this point. So that just is probably the biggest sticking point that is left, but after that we still have a lot more work to do, like building out all the necessary blocks that we need, and and integrating, and so that you get contexts into the blocks and things like that. We've got a bunch of work yet to do, but it's functional and you can use it, and it's pretty exciting to look at the overall architecture. So progress on that is at issue 86. There are currently 2 branches of work, one that is like the latest work that I'm doing, and then there's also a branch that is just like a stable branch that you can check out that is like a layout demo branch or something like that. But all that information is in issue 86, and you can get more information about there.
That's great. All right, so the next issue on our agenda here is Views and Core. Views, as you all probably know, is the #1 downloaded contributed module for Drupal. It's in Core for Drupal 8, and I think that it's going to be a huge advantage for Backdrop. It's kind of something that sets Drupal apart from WordPress, so having it in Backdrop will be huge for us as well. I know that at the sprint this weekend, we got a bunch of people tasked on views conversions. I think we got some significant improvements in as well. Like views is now enabled by default and disabled in the user interface, so that it is required module. If you don't want views on your site, you can find some way to turn it off, but it's the kind of thing where if we're going to be replacing like the node page and the term listing pages and all the administrative pages with views, it really should be required, and you shouldn't be able to turn it off. So we've removed that from the interface, at least for the 80%. I think that's what we're going to want. So I think that's good. And Views UI is also turned on by default, so people won't have kind of this magical experience of how did this thing get on my page. They'll be able to just go and edit it right away. And then we can write some documentation somewhere about, like, if you want performance improvements, you can turn it off on live. That is a good practice, but it is hard to enforce, as we found in the real world, so we're not going to leave it off by default. So, and
we've got, during the sprint, we also had a volunteer working on converting the user listings to views, which is great.
The admin listing?
Yeah, the admin listings of users.
Yeah.
So that's great. I'm not really sure if he's going to go on and do content as well, but I know that he's got to start on it.
Great. All right, so the next major system we're working on is config management. This is the separation of configuration from content in Drupal 7. Both of these things were stored in the database, sometimes in the same place, sometimes in different places, and it made it really hard to deploy new features and even new sites from one environment to another. Pulling the configuration out of the database and storing it in files is going to make that much easier. We've been trying to do that using the features modules for a while, and there's some places where it just doesn't quite work because that's not how Drupal is intended to be used. Backdrop is rewritten from the ground up to use CMI, just like Drupal 8. Our system is a little different than Drupal 8's, but we think it's more in line with our project's goals. And we've been making a bunch of progress since the beginning of the summer on getting all of CMI converted over. We've got almost all of the variables converted, and a bunch of subsystems are now underway as well. So I don't know if Nate or Paul, you want to give us an update on CMI stuff?
I think we're done with all the variables actually, and I just started working on the date subsystem. That should be finished before too long, hopefully.
Super. And also, we had another volunteer at the sprint at DrupalCorn undertaking text formats to CMI, and it looked like he had that pretty well wrapped up, even just starting at the beginning of the sprint and finished almost at the end of the sprint, which is pretty impressive, finishing pretty much an entire system in a day. So yeah, we're looking really good. I think we've still got a couple of big ones and probably the hardest ones left. In particular, we've got fields that need to be converted, and that'll definitely be the largest task. But yeah, we're looking really good. Like Paul said, there's pull requests for every single settings, like the remainder of variables, like variable get, variable set, that will be converted to config. There's a couple of things that are still left over that weren't in Drupal issues, but a lot of those, the reason they're not in Drupal issues is because they ended up getting replaced with something else. Like variables that are inside of blocks are a good example where those didn't get converted to config, but in our world, they'll get replaced by getting stored into the config of the layout that contains the block. So I think that we're looking really good. We've got pull requests for every single variable that we will actually end up keeping, I think, in Backdrop. But there's still going to be a couple lingering ones until we get replacement systems in place to store those values.
That's great. And I think at the sprint, we have some working actions too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if John is actually going to get to that. I think that we started him on the views conversions for converting the user and content listings because those were related to actions.
Okay.
But I'm not really sure if he's going to get around to doing actions themselves. We might need to touch base with him.
Okay. I thought he was doing the other way around, actions first and then views, but I don't know. Okay. Well, either way, there's a whole bunch of progress going on, which I think is great. And we got a whole bunch of new people to look at the CMI system as well. So getting some feedback on the way that Backdrop did that, I think will be good for us too. So that's good. All right, so those are our three major kind of release blocker areas that we're working on, and they all seem to be moving along, which is great. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff that we're trying to do at the same time as well, including keeping up with Drupal in two major ways. We've got cross-ports from Drupal 7, so these are commits that have been made to Drupal 7 since we forked Backdrop. We want to make sure that any bug fixes that have gone into Drupal 7 are also in Backdrop, otherwise we're going to be a little bit behind. And then as well as changes that have gone into Drupal 8 that we also want in Backdrop. So things like converting to HTML5 and cleaning up our CSS or JavaScript. And with those, we're pretty close on Drupal 7 stuff. I don't know that we have a meta issue for 729, but there's, I know, a couple of serious regressions with 729 that we need to figure out how to fix, either the same way that Drupal's going to fix them or a different way for Backdrop. So we should set up a meta issue for all of the stuff that we can merge in right away, which would be great. I can do that today. But I think all of the other ones are done. It looks like we've got one security issue that's open, and then all of the issues from 724 to 727, I think, are in, aren't they? I think this agenda might not be up to date. And then 728 should also, I've got the last 5 of those in a pull request right now getting tested, so I think we should be close on that as well. So all that stuff should be 729. I think most of the commits from 729 will probably just go straight in with no problem, except for the we've got to figure out what's up with the regression issue. So that'll require a little examination.
Yeah, I think we'll probably end up just waiting for 7.30 to come out before we even try to do the security fix.
Okay.
I've been keeping tabs on that since it's related to file module, and it would really just be best to wait.
Okay, so maybe what we should do then is set up a meta issue for 729 and 30. I'll do that after this call. And then that way we can do all of those together. All the commits. Okay.
Good.
Then Drupal 8 backports. I know we've got one HTML5 element that is currently passing tests, the pull request is, but it's waiting for, I think, like some CSS changes to get in first so we don't break anything. That's the search element. And then of the CSS issues, we're almost 40 out of 50 of those have been in. I'm going to kind of do a cursory review of the last 10 and see if any of them are must-haves or if they're all just kind of nice to have. We should make sure that we've got our stuff being consistent, but if it's not super important, those might get to wait. And then the JavaScript, we're almost done. We're 74 out of 109, so I'll look over those too, and I think what's left of those might also be less important or can be handled later. So that's good. For minor things that we're working on, these are not release blocking, but things that are important for us. We're working on rebranding the installer page. I put this issue back on the agenda just because we also had a bunch of progress made this weekend at the sprint. We got Anna to make us some pretty designs for what the backdrop installer should look like. That includes elements of our new branding, our new logo, and kind of some of the same general cleanup that happened on the Drupal 8 installer. And I'm working on today trying to code that up so that we can get our identity on the install page for backdrop. So when people are installing it, doesn't feel like they're installing Drupal 7. Which I think is going to be big for us too. We also had some initial progress on style guide, but I don't think there's been any movement on that lately, so it might be good to reach back and touch base with our designer there and make sure that that's going forward too. And then we've got some user experience improvements that are going on also. Hasn't been any movement yet on the rich text editor, but now with a launch scheduled for fall, I think we might be able to get that in, which will be awesome. And then terminology updates that we've been making a lot of progress on this too. We've got a bunch of stuff that's already moved around. We took the permissions page and the roles page and moved them underneath configuration with a little cleanup around the page titles on those. And then we're also working on changing the navigation links to the modules page and reorganizing top-level items just so that people can find things a little bit more easily. We've got content and user accounts grouped together, followed by modules and themes that are grouped together, followed by structure and config, which are grouped together. Not grouped together, single links, but next to each other in the menu, which I think will make a little bit more sense. And we're going to rebrand the way it works in the admin menu now. The top level items aren't ones people click on, so they're more like category headings. And then when you drop down, you get to the /list page. That's what people click on, so that'll have a different name on it. So for example, in the themes list, the top level one says appearance, and the second level one says themes. And the modules page, the top one will say functionality, and the second one will say modules. So I think that'll kind of help teach people that themes control your site's appearance and modules control your site's functionality. People who are looking for the keyword module will still be able to find it. I think it just makes a little bit more sense. So there's a pull request in the queue for that. I think it's also passing tests. But if anyone has any really strong objections to those changes, that could probably use a review. So it's issue... there we go. I don't know.
I'm looking for it as well, but
Okay, it's issue 209. So if anyone wants to go take a look at that.
Yeah, there's a much bigger discussion ended up opening up there, but I don't think that will happen right away. I think that'll happen, like, there was a suggestion to reorganize pretty much everything, but at this point, like, we're just titling things so that they make more sense in a hierarchical structure, but we're not actually changing any paths or changing where they go or the nesting or anything like that. So at this point, we're just setting it up so that it works better in a hierarchical structure. Like previously, it was like content to content, and that wasn't helpful. And people, you know. So we're making it so the top level item is different than the sub level item. And I think that is in a really good spot. But yeah, any additional feedback that we can get, we'd love to have it in issue 209.
Okay. All right. Lastly, what we're working on in minor improvements is theme system cleanup. This is generally just consolidation of stuff that is duplicate and a little cleanup of the syntax and the template files. This will also tie in nicely with our blocks and layout system when we figure out how layout templates are going to be working. So I think there's a bunch more work to come there as well. So the next section of our meeting is for updates from the PMC. And I don't think there are any this week other than the fact that we have pushed the release date from summer to fall. Under peripheral things that we're working on, we've got an API site. Luke has that underway, with creating a place for us to put our change requests, and then we'll also hook that up to actually read the backdrop code base. An update server, which we need someone to work on. If anyone wants to volunteer for that, that would be really great. A GitHub service that'll let anyone register a GitHub project as a backdrop-related project, which I think would be useful for backdropcms.org to aggregate modules and themes that are specifically for backdrop. And then we also have more work coming for our primary website. Obviously, getting our new logo on there, a little rebrand right before the launch would be great too. And then sprints, we had our DrupalCon sprint, which went really well. We're going to be doing a similar sprint at Drupal Camp Twin Cities, which is in 2 weeks, I think. And then, of course, every Thursday after this meeting. So this morning we've already been sprinting, but after this over we'll continue. And then I wanted to see if there were any other questions or anything else that we should add to this weekly agenda. Comments?
I don't think I've got any.
Sounds quiet. All right. Well, in that case, I guess we'll wrap this meeting and continue in IRC. So if anyone who's watching the video right now wants to ask us anything, you can hop in IRC. Our channel is #backdrop. Or, of course, you can tweet at us or add a comment on our Facebook page, or you can try and add something on Google+, but I don't really know how it works. So I would recommend avoiding that avenue if at all possible. But yeah, we can see you on the internet if not in the Hangout. So, all right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thanks, guys. See you next week.